When anger leads, it becomes a prison, but when it serves reason, it becomes power. You hate how angry you get and how easily you lose control, the way it takes over your life and smolders into a bitterness that consumes everything. But rage serves a purpose, and it's because no matter how destructive it can be, you hate feeling powerless even more. Your temper costs you rationality, respect, and peace. But anger is a biological response with as much potential benefit as harm. And when mastered, it becomes the sharpest tool you have for change. Some of us are addicted to anger because it's the only time we feel powerful. And some of us carry rage and mistake it for strength until it starts burning the wrong things. The truth is, though, that anger isn't really the problem. It's potential power pointed in the wrong direction, fueled by pain or fear and mismanaged by undeveloped character. When you learn to command it instead of collapsing under its weight, that same fire can generate discipline, clarity, and courage. Most people are either at the mercy of their temper or try to suppress it. But suppressed anger corrodes the soul and breeds weakness. Anger doesn't dissolve when it's buried, it ferments. It turns into shame, apathy, and eventually depression, something I had to learn the hard way. My lowest points weren't just from being mad, they came when I felt powerless and I was angry at the situation. There was one time in particular where I thought I was depressed, and I was, but I was also struggling with these random fits of rage that would just take over and I couldn't control them. I couldn't explain them. And one day I was dealing with this issue and a wave of despair washed over me. But right before it hit, I noticed a very brief but intense flash of rage. Unraveling that, I realized that the fire had smoldered into despondency and was burning me from the inside out because I refused to face the problem. So I was feeling depressed and helpless and hopeless because I wasn't doing anything about it. I had developed this sort of victimhood mentality, and I was just sitting there thinking, okay, I can't do anything about what's making me angry. Therefore, what's the natural response? Get burnt out, get tired, become hopeless. And again, this was just because I refused to face the problem. But once I realized that the two emotional states were connected, everything shifted. I stopped hiding from the anger and instead used the indignation as fuel to start taking back control, to start taking action. Turns out I wasn't powerless. I just hadn't been willing to make the tough decisions that would initiate change. Anger became the motivation because I was upset about the situation. It gave me the strength to walk away from what was breaking me instead of staying and just quietly rotting. The emotion itself isn't the issue. The real problem is lack of control, improper suppression, or misdirection. Now, lack of control is obvious, but what do I mean by improper suppression? I say improper because there are many times when you have to just swallow all those hateful things that you want to say. But if you only do that, you lose the ability to distinguish between your ego and righteous anger. And that is something that should compel action. All emotions are just signposts, and anger is no different. The unconscious mind doesn't possess language skills, so it communicates mostly through feelings. Anger is one of the ways it gets you moving. And this should be obvious because why else would we have such a hard time keeping our mouths shut when people are mistreating us or getting on our nerves? Now, it may be wrong. The anger, the emotional response, it could be wrong. I'm not going to sit here and validate your feelings, just to be clear. Sometimes it's ego, fear, immaturity, paranoia, or whatever else. But part of self mastery is learning to identify the source of the impulse and determine whether it's coming from and aimed at something constructive or destructive. Anger is essentially untrained and undirected strength, power that could potentially become virtue through discipline. It's not evil, it's just energy, raw physical power that surges through the body to confront whatever threatens it. The problem is not the capacity for aggression, it's the lack of training behind it. When anger is ruled by impulse, it lashes out. When ruled by principle, it becomes courage. For example, someone threatens your family. That pisses you off enough to stand up to what would otherwise be an extremely intimidating threat. Anger at its best is a passionate commitment to protect, serve, and restore justice. It sharpens your focus, hardens your resolve, and makes you decisive when hesitation could cost everything. Properly trained, anger becomes strength under choice, not compulsion. It's what ancient thinkers called the irritable power of the soul, a sacred intensity meant to fight deception and endure hardship, not destroy people. It's the same fire that makes a warrior stand firm, a parent defend their child, or a reformer speak truth in the face of evil. Think of all the powerful speakers who gave voice to the suppressed rage of their generation, but channeled it into a noble and aspirational calling. This energy is already inside you, and the discipline decides what it serves. which is where the real battle begins. Learning to direct the force instead of letting it direct you. Finding the middle ground is not about balance either. It's not about letting off a little steam here and there or just using anger to be more productive, although that can be very useful. The temper escapes through cracks in your character. So the first step is to know yourself. It's hard to make content about this, by the way, because the people with a pride issue hear this and go, yeah, I should use anger to assert myself more. Oh, I'm always getting taken advantage of. When in reality, those are the people who first need to learn to be humble. On the other hand, an apathetic pushover will hear all these things I'm saying and go, yeah, I need to be extra careful not to get mad at anyone. When for them, they need to stop being a doormat. The point is, I can't give you a one size fits all approach because you have to do the work yourself. If you can't control your temper through sheer force of will, then there's no hack that's going to take that away. You have to become stronger than your emotions. It's just the reality. I'm sorry. But if you're a fearful person, you probably haven't developed the capacity for confrontation. You avoid tension instead of mastering it. It's the same thing with anger. When anger surfaces, it overwhelms you because you've never trained that muscle. Courage is about doing the things that scare you while you still feel fear. When it comes to anger, strength isn't about never feeling the rage. It's about being able to stand in it without losing your head so you can decide whether this needs to be snuffed out or guided into constructive action. And if you don't have the ability to choose between the two and do either one, you're a slave to your impulses. The goal isn't about suppression or indulgence, just direction. Indulged anger consumes clarity and breeds pride. Uncontrolled anger always feels righteous and good in the moment. And there's always the very real danger that anything you do in the heat of the moment is going to backfire. You convince yourself you're in the right when you're really just defending your ego. Pride blinds reason by turning anger outward towards people instead of towards the problem. But when you slow down enough to look deeper, you usually find pain sitting beneath the hostility, driving a reactionary response aimed at protecting your sense of self. Like you don't want to get hurt and somebody is threatening you, or at least it seems that way. And so the intuitive response to lash out in a rage, recognizing that pain within yourself can help shift your perspective and soften you a little bit. And since you're already in an emotionally charged state, you might even notice a heightened sense of empathy towards others, recognizing a similar pain behind the actions that were hurting you in the first place. This helps transform blind fury into empathy with appropriate boundaries. It redirects the same fighting energy into protection and progress instead of punishment. Now, sympathy can be exploited, so you need to be careful with that too, but you understand what I'm saying. In its redeemed form, anger becomes righteous strength, energy aimed at confronting things like evil, injustice, or even your own weakness instead of tearing others down. And that shift begins with grief, not hatred. Feeling dissatisfaction towards what's wrong without letting it poison your heart. Being sad over the fact that this person is doing this thing and where is this coming from and what happened to them to make them think that this is an appropriate response, and even a certain amount of grief towards the fact that, like, if you do have to be combative with somebody, it's not out of bloodlust, it's out of the fact that, like, this is just something that's necessary and has to be done. That will temper the blind fury and turn it into something a little bit more controlled and productive. This is a reorientation of emotion, not repression. You don't quench the fire so much as directed. Because once you learn to grieve what's broken instead of hating who broke it, you start using anger for what it was meant for. Just look at any major changes in terms of, and I despise this phrase with a passion because of what it implies, but it is technically the correct way to say it, but social justice, cultural movements that disrupt societal level injustice. It usually starts with enough people being pissed off enough to speak up, but cool-headed enough to manage the movement. Think Malcolm X as opposed to the more recent Minneapolis riots, for example. Everything that happened in 2020 was just pure, unadulterated chaos. It accomplished absolutely nothing but creating more division and destroying the infrastructure that the rioters depended on, which is ridiculous. Very low IQ, emotional temper tantrum, which is what the media wanted, but it doesn't help anyone except the puppet master, which is a great example of rage bait being used to manipulate the masses into acting unreasonably. Another reason you need to get control of your anger, because it's very easy to manipulate and control someone who does not have a good handle on their temper. Freedom from that manipulation begins with freedom from your own impulses, because discipline is the bridge between emotional response and mastery. Everyone feels emotion, but most of us have very little control over our urges. The goal isn't to stifle those feelings indefinitely, but to just gain power over them, to learn to govern them. Emotions are a major component of what makes us human, but they need to be allocated to the role they're meant for, which is to compel action. But emotions are often wrong. When emotion leads, the result is chaos. But when discipline takes the wheel, fury becomes focus. Self mastery means emotion serves principle, not impulse. You still feel the same fire, but instead of burning everything around you, it forges your mind from a weak, formless, whiny puddle of ineptitude into something vaguely useful. Control is a lot more than repression, by the way. We're talking about dominance through discipline. Emotion is fuel, but focus is the foot on the gas, and character is the hand on the wheel. Without a clear vision of what direction you want to move in and the discipline to stay locked in despite obstacles, fatigue, unexpected detours, failure, etc., that power crashes. Seneca wrote, "It does not matter what you bear, but how you bear it." The Stoics knew what modern culture forgets, that self-control is not weakness, that no matter what struggle you're in, you still have an opportunity to learn something from that, to develop your character in some way, shape, or form. And it may not be the test or the lesson that you wanted. It might not be the experience that, you think you should have, but it's still your opportunity to do something with yourself, to develop yourself in a good way. And if you don't make that decision, then you're just going to default to whatever your conditioning is. You're going to default to whatever you feel in that moment, and you're probably not going to make good decisions. So stop worrying about, well, I'm in this situation and I'm angry because of this situation and it's not fair. Therefore, that's why I'm struggling. No, you're struggling because at the end of the day, you don't have enough control over yourself. And again, we're human. We're not going to have control over ourselves. It's okay to look at the situation and go, yeah, I need a lot of work. Great. Like start doing that work instead of complaining about how hard it is or about how unfair it is. Life is unfair to everyone. I have certain advantages that other people don't have, and I also have certain handicaps that other people don't have. It's the same for everyone. We have our own battles, we have our own struggle. What matters is how we own up to it, how we face those things, and who we choose to become through those difficulties instead of crumbling and just falling to pieces and making excuses. No man is free who cannot control himself. So each time you pause, I think that was Pythagoras, I might be wrong, but each time you pause before reacting, you reclaim a certain amount of internal territory that emotion once ruled over. That's how chaos becomes character, because silence isn't suppression, it's strategy. Or, in the words of Pythagoras, be silent, or let thy words be worth more than silence. That stillness, the ability to bite your tongue and control your temper and to keep things from spiraling out, it builds the tension for something greater to emerge, the mental wherewithal to act when it actually matters and to do so in a productive and strategic and intentional way. Most people are ruled by anger because they never learned to command it. And anger is a very ancient form of power, and it's also one of the least understood. Most people let it lead them like a rider dragged by his own horse. They mistake reaction for strength and volume for conviction. I know some people who are dead set on the fact that I'm talking louder than you, therefore I'm right. It's like, okay, sure. But power without control is not power. It's slavery to impulse. Anger is raw energy, and if you don't give it orders, it'll give them to you. The difference between those two states is purpose. Does your anger serve your mission or your pride? Does the flame fuel you or fool you? Do you burn in anger or burn through the fear that holds you down? When you reach that point, anger stops being a threat and starts becoming a tool. The same energy that once wrecked your peace now begins to build your resilience. Awareness and restraint turn reaction into authority. Anger isn't dangerous because it exists. It's dangerous because it moves faster than rational thought. The spark always comes before the fire, but the problem is that most people don't see it until everything's already burning. The discipline of being watchful is learning to notice that first little flicker of irritation or anxiety or whatever else it is before it grows, and developing the habit of choosing self-control over indulgence. A lot of that happens in your thought processes, It's the invisible choices that you make that nobody else knows about, but you choose to keep a level head and you choose not to obsess over the things that make you upset. For me personally, it's not so much that like if something happens, I I say that I can control myself and not explode. Generally speaking, I'm good at that. Where I struggle is the bitterness. It's the letting go of those things. It's not latching on to like, well, this person did this person did that, and this other person did this other thing, and they all stack up and kind of say the same message. And then I get stuck thinking, well, all people are like that, or all of certain kinds of people do these particular things. That's not healthy, and it's not wrong to notice patterns, but it is a bad idea to let those things consume you. Awareness transforms that reaction into a choice. But remember, it's not just those moments, like I said, where someone gets on your nerves. It is also the bitterness that tends to linger when we fail to deal with unresolved issues. When you recognize anger early, you see it for what it really is, an emotional signal, not an unavoidable law. You stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And start asking, what is this trying to drive me to? What is this trying to tell me? What action is this trying to spur? And does it actually make sense for me to do that thing? That shift is everything. Your emotions could be wrong, but when you understand that the unconscious is trying to look out for you, but is just wrong about a lot of things, you begin developing a certain amount of discernment and maturity that we just don't see that often. And it's emotions that cause people to fail in general. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine if the feeling of fear never stops you from taking opportunities. You only listen to that feeling when it made perfect logical sense to do so. What if you never lost your temper? You never spoke a single word in anger. How might that affect other people's perception of you? How might that affect your ability to think clearly through problems? How much more respect would you have? No ego, no bitterness, nothing for a manipulator to grab hold of. And the same thing with desire. What if you were never distracted by things like greed, envy, or sex? What if instead you were laser focused on the goals that you had set? You never overate, never let laziness dictate your pace, never got caught up in unnecessary drama. Oh, but then you wouldn't be human. No, you would still be human. You would still feel things. You just wouldn't be controlled by them. In other words, you would be an adult instead of a child stuck in an adult's body. This is where emotion becomes intelligence and impulse turns into authority. When emotion leads, reason becomes its hostage. Fear and anger are two sides of the same survival instinct. One pulls back to preserve, the other surges forward to protect. When either takes control, reason is bound and dragged along for the ride. Sometimes that's good, honestly, but in day-to-day life, maybe not so much. Like there's certain things that should scare you. There's certain things that should infuriate you. There's certain times where you don't need to sit back and think. You need to just act. But again, it's like it's the bitterness, the worry, the ruminations, just like the daily obsession over the things that upset you. That's where it's a big problem. Not saying losing your temper isn't a big problem. I'm just saying, it's a lot easier to manage those big moments when you're good at managing the little ones. But back to this being two sides of the same coin, you get angry very easily when you're afraid, because both emotions spring from the same root, which is the need for safety. Fear unmanaged becomes paralysis. Anger unmanaged becomes destruction. But when guided, both become forms of what Nietzsche called the will to power. Fear, when managed, becomes alertness and prudence, the ability to sense danger without surrendering to it. Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that's a healthy fear, purified into reverence instead of panic. People love to misinterpret that verse as God wanting us to be terrified of him. But if God really is all powerful, you should probably be a little nervous about making him angry, right? That's reasonable. And it'll also probably help you to do the right thing, even when you don't want to, if you have a little healthy dose of fear. I know for a fact, have avoided some bad situations because I was afraid. Is there not some wisdom in making prudent and sensible choices out of recognition of the fact that my actions come with consequences? That's not the same thing as living in anxiety. It's not the same thing as being fearful. It's just being smart. Once guided, fear becomes discernment that warns but doesn't disable. It's the quiet voice that says, hey, be careful, while courage answers, I am, but this is worth the risk. Together, they balance the scales. Fear preserves, anger defends. Art is keeping reason in command so both serve their proper roles, because the moment emotion takes the lead, you lose your ability to steer. Wisdom governs emotion, impulse enslaves it. Anyone can react, only the wise can rule themselves despite the heat of emotion. Proverbs calls that mastery greater than conquest. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit better than one who takes a city. The ancient writers understood something that modern power rarely grasps, that real strength isn't in domination, it's in discipline. The true battle is always won first in the mind, and the way to the mind is through the body. That means training when you physically want to give up, when your hands are shaking and your heart is pounding in your eyeballs, but you choose to keep a level head because you refuse to let anyone control you. And I'm not just talking about going to the gym, I'm talking about like when you're in these tangible situations, like you're exposed to the things that scare you, the things that make you angry, and you go in with a plan and say, this is exactly what I'm going to do when my feelings start to get the best of me. And you go in there and you practice it, and you discipline yourself to go through this the same way you would anything else that's important to you. You go, you practice, you get the reps in, you expose yourself to the things that could potentially hurt you, and you learn to deal with them. That's how your nervous system learns that you're not actually in great danger. And once that sense of danger leaves, so does the feeling of panic and rage a lot of times. Again, there are situations where that's going to be different. And those are probably the situations where you need to be upset. And at that point, you can start choosing to put anger to good use. So, story time, I was infuriated by the way I was treated early in my military career. I was so mad that I would be up all night just thinking about beating the crap out of everyone who I considered to be an enemy. So after a few days of this, I decided, well, I can't sleep anyway, so I might as well do something with all this energy. So instead of laying in bed obsessing and ruminating, I would study tactical manuals. I would memorize radio protocols, anything we were supposed to know, and even things that I really wasn't supposed to know at that level. I had it locked down within a week, and I had very much impressed all my senior leadership, made my peers jealous. That was a good use of anger. Unfortunately, the story does not end there. My psychological dominance, unrestrained by the virtues of things like patience and tact, only served to threaten the egos of those I was trying to protect myself from. I hadn't mastered the self control aspect needed to present my work and progress in an appropriate way. I was still young. I think I was 18 at the time. So when they doubled down and tried to set me straight, I essentially told them that they had failed to impress me as men, that they were only in charge because of time in, not through any real achievements or competence. And the only way I would respect them again as men would be through the use of physical violence, which I was quite anxious for at this point. So I got kicked out of that company, which to get kicked out of anywhere in the Marine Corps infantry because of aggression, that's saying something if it speaks to my mental state at the time. But the resulting pain went a long way in my character formation. It taught me to control myself a little bit better, and it made me a much stronger person, which we have a saying in the Marine Corps: you can be smart or you can be strong. In other words, get it right the first time or suffer. And I'm stubborn, so I usually choose the hard way. And again, to go back to the whole anger and fear thing and the relationship between the two, I used to be very easy to intimidate. If somebody would threaten me, I would like feel like I had to lash back out. That's how I felt when I was a young kid. I was bullied a lot in school, and I didn't have any friends, so I had to stand up for myself. So I was very quick to get angry and just like go to town. And as I got older and I started studying martial arts, I realized that I became less and less afraid of people, and that actually helped my temper tremendously. Because when somebody threatened me, it still doesn't feel great. Like if somebody insults you, right? I'm not saying I don't get angry, but it's not from a place of like I have to be angry. I have to deal with this. It's more so like, okay, this guy's a pain in the ass. He's super annoying. Maybe I should knock him out. Maybe I'll just let him go. Who knows? It's not really worth the paperwork if I accidentally put him in the hospital. It's not worth the possibility of his friend that I don't know about pulling out a gun and shooting me. It's just not, right? And so you have to kind of mature a little bit, and that gets easier the more secure you are in yourself, the more competent you feel, the less intimidated by others in general that you are, the less fear that you bring to the table, the less of an emotional response you tend to have. Now, there's plenty of martial artists who still have a fragile ego. I'm not saying that that's the cure, but it is a step in the right direction. And I hope that kind of illustrates what I mean by the relationship between those two things a little bit, because it's really interesting. Like if you look at like how quickly you fly into a rage when you're scared of something versus if you're just in normal day-to-day life, it's super interesting. And so then you look at the way that people manipulate others, like individuals and also organizations. I'm not saying the media again because I already said that once in this episode. Just hypothetically, somebody wants to manipulate somebody else's relationship. It's a company, it's a salesman, it's whatever. If you can make somebody afraid and also angry, and you go back and forth between those two things, you really destabilize that individual. And if you've gone through it yourself, you know how disruptive it can be and how disorienting everything feels, because you're constantly going back and forth between these two really powerful emotions that don't have anywhere to go. So you're just kind of stewing in it. And it can be pretty useful. I'm not saying to do that. I'm saying to look out for it and to understand when someone is trying to pull those strings, and you kind of notice that relationship of anger, fear, back and forth, back and forth. It's like that person probably has some idea of what they're doing. It's probably not an accident. You should probably stay away from them. All that to say, anger guided by wisdom becomes moral strength, the ability to act with deliberation instead of impulse, to strike with precision instead of pride. Patience, too, is power in disguise. Sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. That isn't weakness, it's a choice, it's a strategy. It's seeing 10 moves ahead while others burn themselves out on the first. The wise understand that every emotion is a test of governance. The fool serves his feelings, the disciplined makes their feelings serve them. Because wisdom doesn't extinguish emotion, it doesn't make you less human. It gives direction and orders and purpose to those things. Emotion was designed for preservation and justice, not destruction. Anger was never meant to destroy and tear down, it was meant to defend. In its purified form, again, righteous anger is the power that fuels zeal, the drive to confront evil and injustice, to protect the innocent, correct falsehood, not in vengeance, but out of compassion. When anger's energy is refined through discipline and wisdom, it becomes the fire that clears corruption without scorching the good beneath it. St. John Comacus called this the irascible power sanctified, a flame that burns pride and temptation instead of neighbors. The ancient teachers of self-mastery understood that both anger and fear are not flaws to suppress, but energies to baptize. They're raw instruments of preservation and justice, emotional tools designed for courage and discernment and love when ruled by reason. So stop being afraid of these things. Stop feeling like you have no control over them. You only have no control because you haven't taken the steps to actually overcome them, because you fall apart the first time you're tested and you refuse to advance and mature and grow. And so you just stay stuck in these negative cycles that spiral out worse and worse, because they don't just stay steady, they compound. And they get worse and worse and worse the longer you allow them to be reinforced and developed and explored. I don't know how else to say it. Like, you have to deal with the small problems that confront you on a daily basis in a wise way, in a productive way, in a level-headed, strategic way. When anger is anchored in purpose, it becomes strength in motion. So before acting, ask, what is this emotion trying to defend? That question by itself cuts through impulse and reveals intent. Even if you don't figure it out at first, at least you're actually thinking about what you're doing. That's a great start. It turns reaction into intention and reason and thoughtfulness, contemplation, slowly at first, but you'll get momentum with practice. And that's what you have to treat this as: practice. You want to master yourself. Otherwise, you're just going to stay stuck. And not only stuck, you're going to get worse, because the longer you stay in this, the more people are going to control you, the more upset you're going to get about that, the more you're going to recognize the hopelessness of your situation, the more afraid you're going to get, the more people are going to take advantage of you, the more you're just going to be angry at everyone all the time. Like, it doesn't end. So redirect that energy towards building, not breaking, towards confronting what's wrong instead of punishing who's wrong. But mastery isn't just mental, it's also physical. So I already talked about this a little bit, but training the body under pressure disciplines the mind under stress. Martial arts, weightlifting, fasting, things like these teach the body to move and respond without panic. And it teaches the heart to act without frenzy. Physical discipline tethers emotion to will, creating unity between power and restraint. But the crucial ingredient here is humility. Without it, strength becomes tyranny. With it, anger becomes service. Humility keeps anger in the passenger seat where it belongs, ready to act, but never allowed to steer. It also opens the door to things like compassion and empathy, which tends to reorient or even diffuse the rage all on its own. So, let anger serve your principles, not your pride. If you channel it into purpose, it'll sharpen your resolve, clear your mind, and strengthen your character. You'll stop reacting and start leading. The goal isn't to feel less, it's to master what you feel so completely that emotion becomes your ally in the pursuit of noble and beneficial things like wisdom, justice, and peace. If you sign up for my email list, I'll send you a free PDF of a mental framework designed to help you think through problems strategically. You should practice with it every day. I try to, but you can also just like copy paste the framework into ChatGPT or something with a short explanation of your situation, and it'll cut right through the emotional fog and help you make better decisions. And you understand the thought process that the AI followed, which means that if something's wrong, you can tweak it. But you also don't know what reason these programs follow. And you can't just say, what do I do here? Like, well, what perspective is it coming from? What strategy is it using? Like, where are its priorities? This will kind of alleviate all that stuff. But one of the things it can be useful for is making good decisions in the heat of the moment, whether you're angry, fearful, confused, whatever it is. Don't worry, I'm not going to spam you with emails you'll never read or try to give you some dumb BS to trick you into buying other things from me. I am building the business, which means I do have to sell things, but I believe in doing that a certain way, which means delivering on my promises, providing real value. So check that out. Let me know what you think. I'll see you guys soon. Love you. Peace out.